Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Yeah, good evening, Alex. Doing pretty well. Another successful weekend, and I don't know. It feels like things are looking up around Tiger Town at the moment.
Absolutely. It feels like the mood has definitely shifted since the last time we spoke off the back of the Norwich and Doncaster defeats. We got the victory against Blackburn to discuss, and of course, I guess the big news to go with it is the inclusion in the starting lineup being Scott Twine on loan from Burnley, replacing Jason Lakillo in the starting lineup. I guess probably a word first on that signing and what you made of it.
Yeah, I thought it was an unbelievable bit of business, and I mean, in some ways, it kind of felt like we already had him, last season. Like he was, sometimes you kind of get attached to those rumors, and it seems kind of inevitable. And I think it was just because of the league he was in at the time and the aspirations that we were showing at the club. It sort of sounded like a match made in heaven, and we're obviously beaten to the punch by Burnley, and it seems like a lot can happen in 12 months of football, and it seems like we're a really ready-made fit for where he's at the moment. And obviously a player that oozes class and will certainly provide a lot more from set pieces for us. So and then some. But yeah, look, I thought that he started incredibly well, given the fact that it was a pretty swift inclusion into the team, given he just got signed, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how he develops. But yeah, a signing that I think many people will echo my thoughts in saying it's one that we're excited about.
Yeah, and it was certainly an exciting start to the game. And I suppose something that we commented on after the Doncaster and Norwich games was perhaps the fact that the style wasn't shifting as quickly as some might have liked. But we've certainly seen over the last couple of games against Sheff Wednesday and now against Blackburn, that attacking edge is really emerging in this City side, and we're really putting teams on the back foot. And you saw, I mean, I think there's a lot of commentary around how we performed after the red card, but even before the red card, and actually what led to the red card was City playing on the front foot. Delap, terrific with his ability to take the ball back to goal and sort of turn his defender and get into that space, and what led to that red card. But you look at some of the efforts from Twine, Slater, Delap, as mentioned. I mean, there was a lot of really positive play from City even before that red card.
Oh, absolutely. And, you touched on it, but the passing stat, I can't remember how many completed passes it was, but it was like up in the high 600s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And that really speaks to, the philosophy of Rosenior and how it's now starting to kind of, play out. And let's not forget as well, we're away from home. I know that it's much harder to go to, a championship club like Blackburn, who had a pretty impressive season last year, and by all reports, even this season, look like they're going to be, certainly fighting for those promotion places. And to go to their house and perform, as you said, like bravely in the way that we did even prior to the red card, it certainly bodes well, and it really does appear that the Gaffer's philosophy is starting to, be bought into and applied by the players.
Yeah, and then I guess the only really disappointing element was when that red card happened, and Rosenior said it himself after the game, that the players probably, as we did as supporters, and you can't help but do it, you sort of take for granted that, right, okay, they're down a man. It really sort of sews the game up for us. I maybe took our foots off the gas a little bit, because of course that then let them come back into the game a bit in that second half, got that goal to put themselves ahead before we came back and won it. With the goal itself that they scored from Gallagher, I guess, talking controversial incidents, what was your take on his stamp on, was it Greaves, I think it was, that went actually completely unpunished? I didn't realize at the time he didn't even get a card for it.
Yeah, it was something that, as I watched it, live, I was concerned about, and when I saw replays, I was kind of more frustrated by it. So I'm not really too sure what was going on there. I guess that the more we watch the championship, I guess that there's a few, maybe when you talk about VAR, I guess there's a few levels of things that aren't necessarily at the disposal of the referees as perhaps there are in the Premier League. And we only need to look back to Norwich with the ball crossing the line as another kind of example of that. But yeah, I was perplexed by it, and I guess it was one of those ones that, in reflection of the game, I was surprised that that it wasn't taken into account.
Yeah, my frustration with that was sort of amplified when he got a yellow card 20 minutes later, and you think, geez, if he's on the yellow already, he'd be off there. But and of course, it had to be him to pop up with the goal, and which was really what sparked us into action. And it's funny because you can see that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree when it comes to the Steve Bruce school of tactics of, if you're chasing a game and you've got strikers on the bench, just throw them all on and hope something works. Because I think Rossini said after the game, we ended the game with Lakilo and Vaughan as basically our fullbacks because we just had all our attacking options on the pitch. But it worked. And I think really actually you have to reflect, it give some credit to Delap with that work rate and the effort that he put into running that Blackburn defence so ragged in the first half in particular, that when Connolly came on, there were those gaps in the space for him to exploit, with both goals really being balls over the top that he was able to take advantage of.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we look back on this side of the game, and the highlights are just like two incredible goals. And as you said, it was almost like a chess match where we eventually broke them down. And it was always going to give it. It actually reminded me, as you said, the Gallagher could have been a second send off of that game. I think it was against West Ham in the Premier League, where they went to 9 men, and we still were struggling to kind of find that breakthrough, and I think it eventually happened. But it had vibes of that kind of performance. And I guess the other thing with Rossini's tactics, as you said, you kind of mentioned how brave he was with throwing all the strikers on, and it's one of those games where if he doesn't do that and you get a 1-1 draw, we settle for a point, and people go away going, oh, we should have won. Equally, if we've got a team of strikers essentially on the field, and Blackburn, which they so easily could have done, is pinched a late goal, essentially against the run of play. It's such a high risk, high reward, like really difficult to come back from. But there's always going to be critics, and I think as football fans, we're the first to jump up and say, oh, he should have done this, he should have done that. And in this particular instance, I am really glad, not just because we got the 3 points, but it shows a young manager that has confidence to really, proverbially throw the kitchen sink when the game requires it. And could have easily gone the other way, but I'm really kind of proud of Rossini in the way that he is a manager that is kind of I want to say playing the game without fear. And I think that's the type of philosophy that kind of will be instilled into the players, which does help you have confidence when you go away from home and you are willing to kind of, control possession and knock it around a little bit, and not just hoof it and hope for the best.
Yeah, and I think it was probably that play where Ingram pulled off a fantastic save 1-on-1 with that man Gallagher again, and then I think it was Coyle who cleared off the line on their follow up. Yeah, which really kept us in it, which was fantastic to see. I've lost my train of thought. What was I going to say there? But yeah, look, I think that's it. I think it's the fact that that's what I was going to say is yeah, I think that the great thing about it, as well as you allude to, with potentially it ending up as a 1-1 draw, is we spoke pre-season about the fact that we needed to turn a lot of those 1-1 draws from last season into wins, and this is, I guess, the first example of the so-called, this would have been a 1-1 last season, but because we have these options off the bench that we can bring on, and you think this season we're bringing your Connolly and your Oscar and your Vaughan and your Lakilo off the bench, whereas last season you're bringing kids off the bench because you've got Tufan as your starting striker. We just don't have the depth. So you can see that the depth, and look, we'll talk in a bit about the signings that we've been linked to for this week, but the depth at the club is just growing, and the quality in the squad is just growing. And we'll talk Bristol City to round off the episode, but you start to get on a bit of a run, and all of a sudden things look pretty rosy. Pardon the pun.
No, absolutely. And, as you mentioned, those 1 points, I mean, it feels as fans, like when you get a 1 point draw, it's like, oh, we got away with the point. And every point does count. But as you said, like the difference between claiming 3 points and getting 0 points as opposed to 1 point, like I know this sounds like a, infant's maths lesson at the moment, but there is a substantial difference in those 3 points as far as the end of the season, ladder goes. And it ultimately is wins that speak for themselves, not necessarily the accumulation of three draws. So if you kind of, if you like to weigh it up like that, a win is a crucial part of the season, not just accumulating these draws, then finding out that we're a couple of points short at the end of the season. Whereas you'd rather throw the kitchen sink when you have the opportunity, and I think that was a sign of good management on the weekend, where Racine recognised that it was actually one of those things that if he gets the 3 points out of it, and the feeling in the camp this week will be one of huge confidence, as opposed to, oh, well, we got a point at Blackburn, roll up next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, who are your men of the match?
Yeah, this one is a difficult one for me. I think that the 3 points has to go to Connolly for the brace and ultimately being the match winner. I thought Seri was good, and I did want to kind of pay homage to the assist, but I thought Louis Coyle had a fantastic game, getting forward, and I like to show a bit of parody because I think I panned him after the Norwich game and thought that he was horrible, playing out from the back, and I don't think that that's Louis Coyle's strength. But when Louis Coyle gets forward, his involvement in the play is fantastic. So I've got 2 points for him, and look. There was a whole host of players. I thought Twine could have been my 1 point, but I actually ended up giving my 1 point to Delap because I thought that he was, as we mentioned before, he was just the critical piece in kind of how the match panned out, despite not getting on the score sheet himself. I thought he's just a real handful, and I'm loving what I see from him. So what have I gone? 3 for Connolly, 2 for Coyle, and 1 for Delap.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think it's interesting with Coyle, as you say. Dan and I sort of talked about it last week, but it's almost like we're playing this lopsided formation where Coyle's almost playing as a right winger, and we're playing with a back three, where Greaves is playing like a left back suitor, come centre back, which is really interesting because it does seem to be playing to Coyle's strengths in that sense. Yeah, I went Connolly for the 3 votes as well. I think it's hard to go past him for man of the match. I did go Seri for the 2 votes. I thought the assist, but also his general play, his work rate in midfield, and I think we're seeing the best of him now that he's playing in a side of quality players where he can have that reliability with who he's passing it to and interplay with some of these players. I thought it was a terrific game from him. And then I went Twine with the 1 vote. I thought he was really sharp and on it early in the game. Showed what he can do. Great sort of danger from set pieces, had a few shots. I think he had 3 shots in total for the game, which was great to see. But echo your thoughts on Delap. I thought he had a terrific game as well. Well, we'll talk off-field news then. And boy, there has been some off-field news since our last episode. Just a few bits of transfer news breaking, obviously, with the signing of Twine that we've already discussed. But then also, we were sort of half linked to Jaden Philogene early in the window when I think somebody asked Baz in a Q&A if we were going to try and sign him, and Baz said, no, I'm not saying anything. So it wasn't a no. That all sort of went away because he had such a terrific preseason with Villa, and everyone, including Villa supporters, expected him to be involved in their first team. And all of a sudden it's from all reports at least, as a done deal, as a permanent signing for us for £5 million, if you don't mind. With Keenan Davis, his Villa teammate, basically being thrown in for an extra $1 million to round out a £6 million double deal. Few other bits of transfer news as well to discuss, but we'll just on these 2 players first of all. I think Philogene was on loan at Cardiff last season, scored 5 goals, which as a winger in a struggling side is actually a pretty reasonable return, I would say. And Keenan Davis got 7 in 34 for Watford, which I think he's sort of more of that Heskey style hold up, centre forward, which, it's an interesting one with him coming in because I wonder what it means for Oscar's future at the club. But what's your take on these 2 players?
Well, the one thing that I did say, I'm pretty sure it was about Philogene, was that they actually wanted to insert a buyback clause. If that's the case, I think that probably speaks to how highly regarded he is. And I'm really surprised, to echo, your sentiments, that he is someone that, potentially may be able to leave. Unless, that speaks to Villa might have something in the works themselves. I'm really not sure. But I
I think
think
they've
that would
just,
be,
I think they've just signed a couple of wingers, which people think is why he might be allowed to leave.
yeah, certainly. So to see that, I think that it would be a huge coup if if he was to sign. Yeah, I agree. I think the one with Davis is just to me straight away rings alarm bells about what that means for Oscar.
Mm.
Not that I would necessarily call Oscar a Heskey-esque hold-up striker, but he certainly is, in a different mold of some of the other, players that we do have leading our line. So, look, that to me is more surprising. I think the Philly Gene one is just exciting. Davis Wano is a big question mark, but look, if it happens, I'm sure that Rosinia seems to have some kind of purpose in his planning, and it just speaks to how much Ajun is loving this idea of backing the club. So he's obviously as much of a club owner as he is. He seems like as much of a fan, and he seems to be riding the same level of hype and waves that we are after 3 rounds.
Absolutely. Look, there's talks that are still ongoing with Palace over Raksaki coming in online, another talented winger. He came off the bench against Arsenal this morning, our time, and Hodgson has come out and said he wants him to stay. So you never know what's going to happen. And, Leicester, I think, are linked with him as well. So you never know if that one's going to happen as well. I suspect that that's one of those ones where it's, keeping a few irons in the fire. So if Philogene hadn't happened, we were still advanced with somebody else. And look, if it doesn't happen, I don't think we're going to be too upset in that sense. Goalkeeper also continues to be linked. I've seen a few rumours around Tom Heaton at United or Allsop at Cardiff, I think, were the two names there. And then also still pursuing another centre mid now that Bird is out for 8 to 10 weeks with an injury. So no sort of mention at this stage on who that centre mid would be. But I think Ajun did an interview yesterday with Baz where he basically said those are probably the other three positions that we're still looking to fill.
Well, it sounds like it's obviously all happening in the behind closed doors at the moment, but really exciting. I think that is kind of what the takeaway is. It's really nice to have the transparency to hear, from the owner no less about who we really are in the market for, what positions we're looking to fill. It's very different to the experience under the Alum regime where everything was very kind of tight-lipped, hush-hush. There was very few promises or, comments kind of made, whereas this is a very different experience. And you can see how much more kind of clarity and how much more, I guess, at ease it puts the fans.
Yeah, interesting comment here from Cameron as well, which is probably a fair point. As much as we're loving all the wingers and attackers coming in, another central defender for depth is probably something that we haven't really considered. And, it's interesting, I guess we've got Greaves, Macca and Jones as, I guess, the three main centre backs, where you think at the moment with Vinagre, somewhat injury prone, I suppose you'd say, with the games that he's missed to date. If touching wood, if one of the centre backs were to go down, you certainly find yourself in a bit of a hole because you're basically playing the three centre backs that we have at the moment. So look, it's a fair point, and whether we'd look at, deadline day always throws up something a bit wild. Last year we brought in Vale and Simons on deadline day when no one really expected them. So maybe there's a case that you could bring in a centre back from a Premier League club who's fallen down the pecking order as just a bit of depth. But we'll see what happens on that one. The other interesting news that's sort of broken in the last day or so with conversations with Ajun, where, as you say, he does seem to like to mention a few things and may well explain this splash of transfer activity, is a few major sponsorship deals looking likely to be sewn up. One supposedly with one of Britain's most iconic brands, which would be interesting to see what that ends up being, and two other hefty deals in the works. Now, of course, there was, I think it's Ulka is his name, the Turkish biscuit magnate or tycoon or whatever adjective you'd use to describe him, has been attending a number of City games last season and this. He's one of the richest men in the world, billionaire, who there was sort of rumours around him becoming involved with City in terms of sponsorship. And I think he's the man behind, is it McVitie's, I think is the name for it, which is like a biscuit over in Britain. So if that could link up with, Britain's iconic brands as perhaps the link there. But I suspect, I'm not too surprised at this sponsorship news when you look at the business we're, all of a sudden able to do. It seems as if there is a bit of a cash injection going on.
Look, whatever it is, I like it and keep it coming.
Absolutely. And look, and then actually this was the other topic I wanted to raise with all of these incomings. Of course, incomings will mean outgoings. Cameron asks, what do we think about the players on the way out? Potentially Oscar, Ali, Cynic, Doc. You could throw Woods in there as well, Longman as well. There's a few players that you probably think, if not on permanent, certainly on loan, just to, Simons is another one where you could say give him some playing time. Just to get wages off the books, to get the squad to a manageable size, you'd think a number of those would be on the way out.
It would have to be, for, as you said, sheerly for rotation. And when you consider the fact that we've already had an exit from the League Cup, which I know that isn't necessarily reason to keep players on the books, knowing that you've got, some early round cup that not many people will care about for quite some time, but does provide a good opportunity to rotate players. I can definitely see movement. I know a few of those players have been linked as well. I think I saw Ali off to maybe an MLS side, Colorado, perhaps, I think it was. But yeah look, I think that's a great point. There's some players in that fixture, and I guess it really depends on what Rosenior believes is his kind of best squad. But the fact that there is incredible competition for places, I don't know. That's maybe a question as well that I'd be interested to gather your thoughts on. Like, who out of that group of players would you be really hesitant to part with, perhaps?
If I'm being completely blunt, I don't think any, and that's a really unfortunate thing to say, because I think I had such high hopes for Ali, probably coming into last season after his loan spell, but I think coupled with his injuries and also just the fact that his output just doesn't seem to be there, and presumably on a reasonable wage as well, you sort of think if you're able to recoup at least partly some of the fee that we paid for him, similar with Cynic, I think given the fees that we paid for them in the first place, if you can recoup some of that, it does go some way to paying for these players coming in. And I think Ajun himself put it best almost when he was saying today that last summer we weren't able to attract as much British talent because they just didn't buy into the project, and he relied on bringing in players who already knew him and knew what he was about. But now that we're a year progressed and we can actually get, the quote unquote higher quality players to come into the club, you almost kind of have to then sell some of these players. We've already seen Tete leave. Oscar, I'd love to keep. I think I saw the point made that, when you kind of take away the goals that he scored in August and September last year, he didn't have a great strike rate for the rest of the season, and question marks maybe on whether he fits into Rosenior's style of play, and the fact he hasn't started any league games so far this season. You think he's still got 13 goals, 14 goals last season, so maybe that puts him in a pretty decent price bracket for another championship club potentially. I don't know. Now that he's sort of proven himself in England somewhat, you get 8-9 million for him. All of a sudden, you kind of that pays for your Philogene and Davis deals. I don't know. I don't think I'd be too unhappy losing any of those. I think the ones that I'd also like to see potentially go out on loan would be guys like Koval and Vaughan. If we get to the end of the window, we're really comfortable with our depth and our stocks, I'd be saying, whether they could find like a top League One club to go out on loan to and get that regular game time, I think might do them some good as well.
Yeah, and I guess then the other question that I'd probably add to that is, do you think that those players that we're talking about that are being linked, do you think that they're a kind of a vast improvement on who would be kind of replacing?
Yeah, look, it's a fair question, and I think it's very easy to get sucked into the hype of some of these players. You look at Ebioi coming in last season, we all thought he was going to be brilliant and amazing and score a ton of goals for us and didn't do a whole lot. And so there's always the risk that a Philogene or if we did get like a Raksaki, we could be quite excited and then they could end up not offering a whole lot. But I also look at, the output that we've had from a Longman, from an Ali, from a Cynic so far, and it's not as if you need to be doing a whole lot to be an upgrade on them. I guess it then also comes down to what the wage differences are, and all that sort of thing. And if you're looking at like a Cynic and saying, well, can we get a decent fee for him heading back to Turkey? Maybe just try and capitalize on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of undecided. I don't think I've seen enough of the, of the potential incomings to kind of make a judgment call. But as you said, none of those players, I think, we're kind of kicking and screaming, saying, don't get rid of it. I think the fact that in that sense we're pretty well, with maybe the exception of Oscar,
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I, I, I think would be pretty happy to to see shipped out, whether on loan or permanent. So I think that maybe answers the question. But regardless, it's exciting times to kind of hear about the prospect and the plan that does seem to be in place for the personnel. It's exciting.
Well, one of the players that we did bring in this summer on a permanent deal, we'll talk about now as our player of the week. When I sort of set this up, I was sort of thinking I'd go through based on sort of how long the players have been at the clubs, but I thought I couldn't pass up the opportunity to look at Aaron Connolly this week, given his brace and winning performance against Blackburn. The incredible stat that I noticed today when doing the research on him was in his 5 goals in 8 appearances for us so far, he's already equaled the total number of goals he's scored at any other club he's been at. So he had 5 in 46 for Brighton. He had 2 in a loan spell for Borough. But other than that, his best scoring spell is at City, where he's already got 5 in 8. So you think, everyone could sort of treat with a healthy dose of skepticism Rosenior bringing him into the club and thinking he could put an arm around him and turn his form around. But boy, has it sort of borne fruit so far. Obviously on loan last season, only made a handful of appearances before an injury. Looking, touch wood, that he's staying fit this season so far and finding the back of the net. But he looks a very astute signing for what was presumably a pretty nominal fee.
Yeah, and we spoke about this. I think when we did the podcast at the start of the season with the Tahalan back boys, and kind of launched our predictions for the season, he was probably the player. I think we actually hadn't signed him at the time officially. He was probably the player that I had the highest hopes for, given the fact that we did just see very small flashes of brilliance from him in the time that he did play in. What it did sound like to me from Rosenior's post-match reaction was he's aware of the history of Connolly, obviously, with his injury-plagued kind of season. For someone who I believe he's only 23, maybe 24, he's incredibly young still, and for all of the plaudits and hype that he has kind of warranted, that, as you said, that goal scoring record isn't to match, but that's largely due to injury, I think, as opposed to quality or lack of form. And so I think when I heard Rosenior say at the moment he's only capable of playing 30 minutes, and so that's kind of where we're going to keep him. I think that Rosenior's learned his lesson he understands the quality that Connolly has, but also realizes, particularly where he's at now, it's important to manage him. And if that's what it looks like for the next few weeks, and before he starts playing those larger chunks, I think it would be fascinating to see what his ceiling as a player is.
Yeah, Cameron asked, did we find out why it was a 1-year deal, conduct or fitness? I think it was actually at Connolly's own request, or at least that's the way that Rosenior spun it in public. May well have been the club's request. You never know the exacts on that, but I suspect it was basically from both sides. It was a case of making sure he could get through the season to some degree fully fit. I would suspect that there's some sort of trigger in his contract that if he makes a certain number of appearances by January, maybe, that it would trigger a longer term deal, or maybe at the end of the season would trigger a longer term deal. I think, I don't think there's any, I know that there was a lot of concern when we first signed him that, oh, look, if he comes and has a great 1 year with us, is he going to go off to some other club for free? I think, you'd certainly hope that, I think that the intention would be that he'll be signing a longer term deal with us here. Very similar to Alfie Jones, really. When we first signed him in League One, it was a 1-year deal. I think probably from his perspective to say, well, I don't want to get stuck with a League One team. We went straight up to the Championship and he signed a longer term deal. So I think that's probably it.
Yeah, and also in many ways, I think it's probably the best style contract for both parties. I mean, Connolly seems like an ambitious player who's obviously, had Premier League quality, thus far, and obviously that's our ambition to get back there. So in some ways, if he does prove to be injury prone and isn't able to help that cause this season, it's no real skin off our neck. So that's an incredible prospect to have a player of that quality that is on a contract that largely benefits the club.
Yeah,
I would say. And so, I'm stoked about that. And I think that if we could create any environment to see Connolly play his best football, then a 12-month deal is, I think where it's at.
and I think, to be honest, from his perspective as well, talking about the fact that it's already basically the best spell he's had in club football, I don't think he'd be in a rush to leave, knowing that if he stays here for another couple of years, it's only going to help his development. So I think it's the best thing for all parties as it's set up. All right, we'll finish things off talking about the game against Bristol City this weekend, coming up against Nigel Pearson, which I always enjoy the fact that it's sort of mentor against mentee with Resenia going up against Pearson. And it was interesting, actually. I didn't realize quite how poor our record was against them. It's just the one win in the 10 games, 10 most recent games against them, with that one win being opening day of last season where Sari got the winner in stoppage time. They've had an okay start to the season. Had a win and a draw, and won 5-1 in the League Cup against Oxford. And I think they also had a loss in their most recent game. So I think there's a little bit of impatience starting up with Nigel Pearson, but I think they're doing reasonably well with the squad that they have. They sold their best player, Alex Scott, to Bournemouth in the summer for about 25 million, I think it was in the end. But sounds as if that the income from that deal has basically gone to just kind of covering the wage budget and everything for the club as it is because of maybe a couple of FFP issues. But they have managed to bring in Rob Dickey from QPR and Jason Knight from Derby, who are a couple of handy players. So squad's in reasonable shape. I'd probably say that they're not quite at the same level as like a Blackburn who we've just faced, but they're definitely in that sort of mid-table bracket of teams, I think, where you wouldn't be expecting a win, but you would think it's a very winnable game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably largely, how you have to play the opening rounds to a championship season, because like, as we've seen so many times, the squad that you put out on paper means, essentially nothing. It's so much more about chemistry and like momentum seems to be the funniest thing over 46 games. And, how many of those runs can you go on when every week, keeps you incredibly honest. So yeah, I agree. I think that the storyline of Resenia versus Pearson is one that you can kind of buy into, and it'll certainly be an added extra. But yeah, as you said, there's certainly no reason to fear Bristol, but it will be a difficult, a difficult match. And I guess another opportunity to see, this Resenia style football, and how many passes are there going to be? The fact that it's against a club that will make us play. That sounds like the biggest cliche in football, but we are going to have to be as aggressive as we were last week against Blackburn, because it is at home, obviously, and there's probably that added expectation to take 3 points at home against a squad like Bristol. So yeah, look, certainly no reason to fear them, but a trickly, what am I trying to say? A prickly one.
Yeah, and you don't want to look too far ahead, but we do have Leicester the game after, so you sort of think if we could knock off Bristol City heading into that Leicester game suddenly on a 3-game winning streak, that makes that game really interesting. But as the cliches go, one game at a time. So we'll focus on Bristol City for this week. But look, I guess the question would be then whether you make any changes to that starting 11. It looked pretty strong going up against Blackburn. I mean, I guess you could potentially say whether Lakilo gets the start to sort of push them on the back foot, but I thought the way that we played it with Coyle and Twine almost as the two wide players seemed to work very effectively.
Yeah, and I guess another variable that you would like to throw in there is it's a Friday night fixture over there, Saturday morning our time. So I don't think we'll expect any more incomings in that time, which I guess, given the fact that Twine was able to start after only just arriving through the door, could have been another variable in in Resenia's starting lineup. But yeah, I don't think there'll be too much change. I think that at this stage of the season, like on the back of that Blackburn performance, I'd be surprised to see if Resenia got too creative. You'd want to try and build some kind of continuity, but Yeah, look, I agree with you. I don't think we'll see too much.
And we're one of the league's entertainers. I think we're the third or fourth top scorers in the league after the 3 games. So Adjun's maybe got his wish that we're scoring for fun. So what's your prediction for this one?
Look, I have no reason to be confident, to not be confident. Sorry, given last weekend, I do, as you mentioned, I do think this is a tricky fixture. I think they're one of those teams that will keep us very honest. I'm not expecting to blow them off the park. I think any victory will be good. I actually expect this one to be low scoring, but I'm going to be confident. I think we'll get them 1-0.
Yeah, I was going to say 1-0 as well. I think it'd be nice to get a clean sheet on the board this season. We haven't had one just yet, but yeah, I'd take a nice 1-0 win. Maybe a Delap goal would be good, just to get him back amongst the scorers for this one would be good. But that's all. So thank you for joining me for this one, Logan.
Yeah, no worries, Alex. It's good to be here.
No worries. And thanks everyone for listening in. Until this time next week, we'll be back to discuss the result of that Bristol City game. But until then, come on, City.